Welcome to Politics Unpacked, the series where we explain one of the biggest news topics of the day, then debate the issue with the TLDR team. In today's episode, we discuss what the former UKIP leader and current Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage, has been up to lately. So, in this video, we'll discuss Farage's party, his very active Twitter presence, and his pivot away from Brexit. This is Politics Unpacked. So, aside from his investigative journalism videos that he's been posting on his YouTube channel, Farage has also suggested that he may be changing the name of the Brexit Party to the Reform Party, signalling a change in focus from Brexit to the reformation of the UK's political system. This suggests that his political ambitions are similar to that of parties on the centre and the left, such as the Liberal Democrats, which, let's face it, is an odd thing to consider. While this is one topic we discuss, we'll also discuss Farage's personal view on the recent lockdown rules. While many nearer the centre ground of British politics will agree that lockdowns and restrictions of liberties are necessary in order to stop the spread of the virus, Nigel Farage appears to disagree. He seems to think that they're unnecessary and causing more damage than they're worth. In fact, not only does he not agree with them, he's also been shown to break the lockdown rules. Most notably, he travelled to the US to campaign for President Trump during the 2020 presidential election. Now, UK lockdown rules state that you must isolate for 2 weeks upon your return, even if you test negative. This is because tests may not be able to detect that you have the virus until a few days after you picked it up from someone. Anyway, upon his return, Farage posted a picture of himself at his local pub with a pint in his hands, less than 2 weeks after his Trump rally, which prompted questions about whether what he was doing was lawful. He claimed that it was, and that he tested negative, but as we explained, that's not quite how testing works. Nonetheless, this demonstrates his skepticism of current lockdowns, and his advocacy for a return to normal. So the real question is what this all means for Farage going forward. In a battle for relevance, is Farage moving on from Brexit, and will discussing issues favoured on the right help Farage maintain his place at the centre of British politics? I mean, I don't really know what the intro on this one's going to be because no one's written it yet, and I also don't know when this is going to be released either, so we've got all kinds of problems starting this discussion, but we're just here to discuss Nigel Farage. This is it's almost like an intervention, but without him being here, and without us knowing him, and we're not trying to stop him from doing anything. It's just, he's interesting me at the moment. He's always interesting me, because I would argue, and fight me on this one, he is one of, if not the most interesting people in political life in the UK. Whether you like him or not, he is like a kind of fascinating character. And if I had to read a biography about one of them, he probably would be the one I'd be most interested in. What's he up to outside of wearing a purple tie and shouting about things? But he's clearly built his whole political career on Brexit. That is what he was known for years with UKIP, and now the Brexit Party, which unsurprisingly is based on Brexit. But he's clearly trying to change that at least slightly. I mean, if you go through his Twitter feed, you'll still find a lot of anger about Brexit on there, and a lot of takes about Brexit. But even still, he's noticeably shifting his focus, and that's kind of what we're discussing today. Partly under the guise of the fact that the Brexit Party are rebranding themselves into the Reform Party, who are changing from a pretty much exclusively Brexit-focused political party into a more, I don't even know what category. Does anyone have a nice snappy phrase they'd use to describe what the Reform Party is becoming, besides kind of right-wing, moderately populist?
It has a libertarian edge to it.
Yeah, I was going to say libertarian as well.
We don't know its policies yet, so it's quite hard to characterise.
Yeah, no, that is fair. We don't even know its logo yet. I saw there was a render that someone had that was just the Brexit Party logo, which had the word Brexit changed to Reform, and it was the thing was watermarked with I don't know, not final version or whatever. And it's no shit, it's not the final version. It's literally just the old one that someone's been on Microsoft Paint and attacked. But anyway, the point is that Farage is changing his focus a little bit. as is his party. And as Farage is one of the more influential people in British politics, despite obviously having no official power, he clearly has a lot of influence and a lot of sway. So where he puts his focus not only directs the attention of his followers and his audience, but also potentially changes the focus of kind of British political conversation because, I mean, he's been proved to do that before. So the kind of three things that he's noticeably talking about a lot at the moment that I think are worth discussing are one, his position on lockdown and COVID more generally. Two, and this is pretty timely, but at the moment he's quite angry about Johnson self-isolating. And three, more broadly, he's like fairly anti-environmental at the moment. So those are kind of the three trends. And I think what makes me want to talk about this, and I will stop talking in a minute and let one of you two say something. But what makes me want to talk about this is the fact that he's kind of not only taking new viewpoints and shifting from Brexit, but he's also taking lanes that no one's really in politically in the UK. There's no particular party or even notable politician that is against the movement towards environmentalism. And equally, there's no real major politician. There's a few like Tory backbenchers and stuff, but there's no one that the average person would know that is particularly anti-lockdown and particularly different in their views on COVID. And that's obviously different country by country. And in like the US, you have notable major politicians who are against both of those things. But in the UK, just by the nature of our politics, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that most politicians are broadly pro-lockdown at the moment and also in favour of new environmental regulations and controls. And Farage has clearly spotted that gap in the market again, like he did with Brexit, and is driving his new campaign bus right down it. So I'm interested what you guys think of those issues specifically, and also about Farage's political future more generally.
Ben, why don't you go? Because I'm going to be nice to Nige. So
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I can see where he's coming from with the Reform Party, and I think that we haven't had like a full party dedicated to that. I mean, there's been the Lib Dems who kind of pushed for it a while ago, but it's odd seeing the Lib Dems and Farage's new party agreeing on a subject, considering, you know, their complete disagreement.
You probably want to clarify what they're agreeing on.
Yeah, what are they agreeing on?
I'm not sure they totally align. I'm not sure. When I think Nigel Farage, the Lib Dems aren't necessarily the second thing I think of.
No, but they agree on electoral reform in the sense of like the voting system, because sure. the Lib Dems, or at least, I mean, the Lib Dems used to. I can't imagine they've changed their tune anytime soon. But, 2011, when we had the AV referendum, they were the ones pushing for it. And that was a compromise between the Tories and the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems obviously wanted more of a proportional system. But I suppose it makes sense because they're both, smaller parties.
But for your point, they also both agree on House of Lords reform.
Yes. Yeah. Which is, I mean, if you on the surface it looks odd, but it makes sense because, as I say, they're both smaller parties, so they want more influence in politics. And the only way really for them to get that is through a proportional voting system. I think it'd be pretty mad for any new party to start and then say we're massively in favour of first past the post. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I think both of those things are more circumstantial rather than necessarily really deeply held political ideologies or like beliefs. But it's a good point.
Yeah. And on the lockdown thing, the thing that I mean, when we had the interview with Jonathan Bartley as well, I brought this up, which is I always find it an odd, and I'll explain why I'm bringing this up in a second, but I always find it odd when somebody's running for office or has started a political party and they admit to breaking the law or intending to, because Farage has done that, I think, twice now on lockdown rules. So the first one was him, and it was a small one. But remember when you were only allowed to go out once a day for your walk or something? Mm-hmm. I think he said quite early on, and I could be wrong, so I'll check before we publish. But he said that he went for like a walk in the morning, and then he went for a walk in the afternoon, and he thinks that's completely reasonable.
I was just going to say very quickly, that was guidance, not law. Interestingly,
true.
Was it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But the second one was definitely law, which was having to isolate upon your return from the US, which he went to go to. I think it was a Trump rally, actually.
Yeah, he did.
He came back, and then the pubs opened. He posted a picture of himself on Twitter in a pub, To which quite a lot of people went, hold on a minute, you were in the US less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
What are you doing at pub? To which he said, I've had a test, it's come back negative. And it's like, yeah, but as you put in your tweet, I think on the TLDR Twitter account, Jack, just because you test negative, it might take a while for the test to actually register that you've caught the virus. So that's why the Johnson's bringing in this sort of like 5-day continuous testing thing, because it might not pick it up.
Yeah,
Do you want to sort of correct me on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's worth saying as like a point, actually, of making a point of that one of his things at the moment, as I alluded to, is that he's not a huge fan of Johnson's self-isolating.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you can, and maybe we will have a conversation about like the politics of Johnson being locked up in number 10 and not being leading from the front, or whatever you want to call it. But his statements on how COVID works and how COVID testing works, certainly on Twitter, whether he believes it or not, but what he's saying on Twitter, most of it is just objectively scientifically wrong, in the fact that he's saying, he said that when he came back from the US, he'd had a test, so he shouldn't be locked away still. This was recently when he came back after the election. He was really complaining on Twitter about the fact that he was being locked down for no reason. He'd had a test, he was fine, which just isn't how tests work, and also isn't how the rules work. Like, regardless of whether tests have identified him as safe or not, that is the rules. And you are a leader of a major political party. Well, major in some terms, I guess. But he's certainly a major political figure, as obviously Johnson is too. So kind of regardless, certainly in my opinion, regardless of how testing works, how the science works, how the rules work, they should be following that guidance and setting the example. And
exactly.
Farage's argument seems to be, I've had a test, therefore I must be fine. Or even in Johnson's case, he's had COVID, he's definitely immune, he's fine. Kind of the only citation that he's provided there is Johnson saying he feels like he's full of antibodies, which I would argue is probably less than scientific. But just the fact that he's pushing that agenda of the fact that Johnson shouldn't be locked down because he's had tests and because he's had it before, that's just not scientifically true. Like, he should still be being cautious, especially as an example-setting exercise, even beyond the epidemiological side of it.
And that's exactly it. And this is what I brought up this was why I was bringing up the Jonathan Bartley thing, because I also brought up the same point with him, which was that if you're running for, office, if you're running for government, if you're wanting people to follow, if you want to be the person setting the rules and you want people to follow them, surely you should be following the rules of the current government. Otherwise, you're kind of saying that people should follow your rules but not the current government's rules, and you get into a really, difficult place. And I think there's a slight difference between like unintentionally breaking the rules or something, and then to brazenly saying, I am doing it, I don't agree with them. Because if you're just saying people shouldn't follow the rules if you just don't agree with them, I think you get into a very sad state of affairs. I just find that very odd from politicians when they do that. And Farage has done that, and it makes you question, like, if he really wants to come to power, how can he have the sort of moral justification for other people to follow his rules if they just don't agree with them? And it's also odd that his big thing about like migration and immigrants coming here is that they break the rules, things like that. But he's going out and breaking them. He's brought that up in relation to coronavirus. I think he's put tweets on saying like, you can't come to the UK because of coronavirus unless you come here on a dinghy or something like that, which I think is a tweet that he actually put out. So it's like, that they're breaking coronavirus rules and that's bad. But it's like, but you are. It's just the ones that you don't agree with. I don't understand that at all. Maybe I'm looking at this too sort of. Maybe I'm being a bit too analytical of this. I don't know. What would you two think?
I don't. Well, we had the same conversation, Jonathan Bartley thing. I think there are cases. I'm not sure going to the pub is one, but there are cases in which I think it sort of is not makes sense, but is at least justifiable, where you can break the law out of political principle. If Nigel Farage was a wider point, his going to the pub was a wider point about sort of the libertarian rights of the individual and the state, then perhaps. But it obviously wasn't, because he just got caught going to the pub too soon. But and on the I don't know about that coronavirus tweet. I should say I do want to try and defend Farage on this podcast, because I think he's fascinating, but
But just because he's fascinating doesn't mean that you have to defend him.
But this is of course that's not the motivation for defending him. But I like listening to what he says, and I think his arguments are This is gonna. I think you can at least interpret him generously to be making a fair bit of sense on some things. I don't agree with him about his ridiculous sort of weird climate skepticism that occasionally comes out, nor about the immigration stuff. But I should point out. So I think his arguments against the environmental policy, or at least as they appear on Twitter, are more that people didn't necessarily vote for it. And I know that there were commitments in the Conservative manifesto about environmental spending, but Johnson obviously wants to go above and beyond that environmental spending and above those targets that were originally set. And I think his other point about the environmental stuff is that it's, or maybe this is too generous a reading, that maybe this is not an argument that's implicit in his tweets, but that it's just weird for it to be a priority now, which I think is a fair point. That Johnson talking about how we can all drive Teslas by 2030 is a bit sort of like, well, what about tomorrow when we can't go to the pub?
I would disagree on that. I would say now is, if you're going to do anything like that, now's the perfect time. Because you know when, and I know this point's been laboured a lot over the last few months, but I think it's worth noting that whenever you have a big event in society, that the time afterwards politically is your best chance to change society.
Yeah, but the time after, that's a perfect example, because like it's true that essentially after wars, those are most of the big events. But during wars, Churchill isn't going, it's going to be great, I can't wait to implement a new planning permission system. He's going, let's get over the war. Yeah, it's the same thing with coronavirus. Your priorities should essentially be, and I think this is a fair thing to point. I think the war analogy is a great analogy because it really puts this clear. Is that Johnson should be focusing on the immediate right now, and his habit, or his tendency rather, to start talking about 2030, 2040, 2050 is essentially him trying to get out of jail and say, I know things are going badly, but just imagine the wind turbines.
I would disagree, and I would say that if he has the resource and he has the departments and everything to be able to plan for when this is over, it's not war in the sense that, I know that there is an analogy to it, and I agree with a lot of the analogy, but it's not war in the sense that government's overworked, but I wouldn't say it's as overworked as it was in World War II and all of that. And I think that there still can be planning that takes place, and we've got it's not a definitive end date, but we've got a fairly good idea of when it's going to end, which is quite early next year. It's not going to be dragged
but
on
Johnson
for ages.
was saying that,
so it's good to get ahead of it.
But Johnson gave his big Conservative Party conference speech about green thingy-mabobs way before we knew about the end date. Johnson was already recalibrating the political focus to 2030, and that was get out cause. And I'm not saying that the Department for the Environment should just stop what it's doing while there's coronavirus and start trying to make a coronavirus vaccine out of trees. I'm saying that Johnson, and of course work should still be going on, you should be planning about that sort of thing, but it is politically irresponsible to essentially try and not ignore, but at least refocus attention away from the immediate towards the long term, when there is an immediate crisis and when that is patently for political gain.
I think it's more. I think it's also. Sorry, Jack. I'll be quick, but I think it's just to do with the fact that people are quite down at the minute. It's this is taking quite a big toll on people, and it's good to be optimistic about the positives to come at the end of this. I don't think that's negative. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's politically bad of him to do. I think it's right to look at the good to come from this at the very end. I'm not saying it's obviously I'm not saying it's just. I'm not saying that these things are going to outweigh how bad it's obviously not, but it's good to emphasize that something good is going to come of this, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Are you two not arguing different things here? I feel like you broadly agree, you're just arguing about different things, and the fact that I think I kind of agree with both of you, that I agree with Ben that obviously we should be focusing on what's happening next, and also we obviously have the resources to do that, and we should be focusing on that because we don't want to be caught flat-footed when this does end and there is the opportunity to make major structural change. We want to be prepared for that. But equally, I kind of agree with Zach that the way that it's being messaged certainly looks, if you're being cynical, but you don't even need to be that cynical. It certainly looks like it's a distraction technique and a way of pushing the attention away from current failings and current issues. So I guess both of those things can be true at the same time. We should be preparing for this. We should be talking about this, but it's maybe being used in a cynical way by the government as a distraction and as a way of pushing attention off Brexit.
Mostly agree. But yeah, anyway, going back to the Farage thing, and that I think Farage's main point is that people didn't vote for this Johnson necessarily. They voted for, Northern powerhouse, get Brexit done, no deal Johnson.
Do you not think that's just classic Nigel Farage, though, in the fact that he also claims that all Brexit voters wanted a no-deal Brexit? And it's just like projection of, this is what I voted for, this is what I supported, so therefore everyone agrees with me.
Yeah,
because there certainly
I
will have been Conservatives who are more centrist, that don't necessarily like a lot of Johnson's policies, probably dislike Labour's more, and saw things like the environmental point as a softener for Johnson, and therefore were like, oh, okay, at least he's not anti-environment, he's not whatever.
Yeah,
so there will have been people that definitely saw that and saw it as a positive. And just because some Brexiteers chose Johnson because of his Brexit policies doesn't mean that the rest of it is invalid.
Yeah, I obviously completely agree with you that the truth is obviously somewhere in between, because both, Farage loves caricaturing, you're right, all of Conservative voters. But it's hard to deny, at least, that some fraction of Conservative voters won't have voted for that Johnson. The Johnson that essentially the London suburban voter voted for, remembering him as the nice green leafy mayor with Dave Cam. But that I was stereotyping the nice leafy Londoner who's German.
Yeah, I liked it.
Thank you. Anyway, but but I think there is some truth to it, which I think that Johnson's political advertising has changed significantly. I mean, that's hard to dispute. Essentially, post Cummings, and I think that it's hard to say exactly what he was selling in the election, but I think Farage has at least half a point in that he's changed what he was selling.
Is this not always true of Johnson, though? I feel like you never really know what he's selling.
Then. It's still
Johnson's selling, but Johnson's selling a vibe and a feeling more than he's selling a policy 80% of the time, and
Agreed.
He will shape that feeling into whatever policy form ends up being. And I'm not saying that you weren't agreeing with this. I'm just saying that to critique him on this now feels like. Yeah, of course.
What
that's
did you
what
expect?
Johnson does. Yeah, exactly.
No, well, perhaps. Nigel. I'm again. I'm personifying Mr. Farage here, but Nigel. He might just accept that. He might go. What else did we expect? But that just means I was right all along that Boris is not a great leader.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He did stand aside for Boris.
Yeah.
Of course, that's another absolutely fair. At least it's a I was going to say Latin, but it's a prima facie hypocrisy, but it's not necessarily inconsistent, because he could have just, he would say that he stepped aside for Boris because he wanted Brexit to get done, which is fair.
Yeah.
But
you could equally argue he stood
motivations,
aside.
yes, but
I was going to say he also stood aside for Johnson because he wasn't going to win anyway. I think that is kind of the wider point of what you were saying a minute ago, Ben, of he doesn't want to break the law if he really wants to be in power. I think a lot of these points are, I don't think he does want to be in power. Maybe he wants to be, but I think he has to be realistic in the fact that, maybe we would have said a few years ago we're never going to see a Prime Minister Johnson, but I think it's even less likely we would ever see a Prime Minister Farage, just from the nature of the fact that he's such a controversial figure. You've immediately wiped out 50% of the electorate. To then get that to happen is just, they're supremely unlikely.
No chance. You've also more like 70% of the electorate. He's never polled. Brexit Party polled on 30% when they came in with Theresa May in 2019.
And I think also, as you say, there's a whole percentage of you've obviously got Remain voters who are pretty much certain never to vote for him. You've got a bunch of Conservatives who might be Brexit supporters but just don't like him over the last 20, 30 years or whatever. So the odds of that happening are pretty much zero. So I think a lot of these calculations, the decisions on rallying against lockdowns, rallying against green policies, being very involved with kind of culture war issues kind of thing, aren't trying to capture people's vote or capture people's attention for that reason. I think a lot of it is trying to maintain relevance in the political sphere. And also he's worked out that his main power is shifting the Overton window and changing the conversation and changing the political landscape. And he's probably done the calculation here that, sure, these issues aren't issues that would win elections, and Brexit never won him the elections he wanted them to, besides maybe European Parliament, but arguably that doesn't really matter anyway. But regardless, he's not trying to get there. He's trying to shift the conversation and shift the narrative towards areas that he likes and he's favourable towards. And I think that's what we're seeing with lockdown and with environmental issues here.
Yeah, but
maybe they're not wider political winners, but they are things where he can get his base on side.
I think me and Ben talked about this, didn't we, a podcast or two ago, about how essentially he has this permanent threat of the Reform, Brexit, Freedom Party, whatever he wants to call it. Mm-hmm. And the fact that would take 10 points off the Tories or 5 points or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Means that the Tories are always hyper aware and always have to recalibrate to anticipate Farage's next party, to give him less and less political space. And it's amazingly effective. He gets everything he wants. And
so if that's the case,
I don't mean
to interrupt, but it's just if that is the case, and you were talking, just then about how unlikely Farage, like how genuinely unlikely and almost impossible it is for Farage to actually have any tangible political power, as in an office, for example, Prime Minister. But if you're saying he gets whatever he wants from putting pressure on the Tories, if he's now forming the Reform Party, whose main aim is to get electoral reform for a proportional system that would get him votes,
I think that's too far. I agree. I don't think he's going to get the Conservatives to agree to PR.
I think also it's the issues that he's picking, like things like reforming the electoral system. I just don't think there's the public will and public understanding around that in the same way. I think it's easy to get people hyped up and excited about immigrants or lockdowns or going to the pub or whatever, like his core normal issues. But getting those average people really excited about electoral reform, you might get some of them on side because of his charisma and because of his existing base. But I think asking the government to do that, I just don't think the Conservatives will see the threat there in the same way.
Yeah, the Tories maybe not, but you've also got people on the left and other parties who want electoral reform anyway. Maybe not Labour, but it's not. Maybe he won't be able to pull the Tories that way, but maybe not as many Tories. But there were Labour, working class Labour areas that will have gone UKIP in the past and places like that, and or they would have seen people switch from Labour to UKIP that you might be able to sway over. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's very unlikely.
I think we're missing
just
the point here slightly. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but it's called the Reform Party, but his main policy is not going to be it's not going to be PR. He's going to be pressing the Conservatives on the same things he's always pressed them. He's going to be pressing them on. I mean, that's going to be in the background, as it was in UKIP and as it was with the Brexit Party, reforming the political system. But the main thing is going to be, our future relationship with Europe, inevitably, depending on whatever deal or no deal we get in the end, because he's going to criticise the government either way.
Yeah.
And immigration probably. So the fact that it's called the Reform Party, it's going to be putting the same pressure successfully, I would argue, on the Tories again, because another reason that the Reform point would just not work is because there are no people don't swing based on exactly.
I know.
That's the only thing he has pressure for with his sort of niche single interest things about immigrants and the future relationship with Europe. But it's easy. I think this is so well timed because we're just about to get another thing that Farage wanted, which is a cut in the foreign aid budget. And this now, because we're recording this on Wednesday. Yeah, so later today, Rishi Sunak is expected to announce a cut in the foreign aid budget from 0.7 to apparently 0.5, could be lower. And that was a classic Farage policy, although he wanted to cut to zero, I think. And that now adds to the list of, obviously, Brexit was the thing he wanted, and probably he'll get his most extreme form of Brexit. He looks like he's done that. And a Canadian-style points-based immigration system. I mean, he works. It does exactly, and he works really well. He gets what he wants. That's what I'm getting at.
Core question though, are we peak Farage or are we yet to see more Farage to come, do you think?
I think he's peaked.
Quick answers.
I think definitely peaked.
Yeah,
which is
both
why
of you agree
he's got
on
time to come on the podcast.
Do you want to give him your email address? Come on, how can he contact you, Zach, to organise this?
I'd prefer he just contact you. I don't want to be giving out. I mean, not that many people listen to this. But I just,
You've probably got Zach at TLDRnews.co.uk. I imagine
I do have that actually. I only get promotional emails from Harvest and Monday, but yeah, I do.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, email Zach there and he'll ignore you like he ignores all the other emails probably. But...
Okay.
I think that's it. I got
Yeah.
nothing more to say.